Now, I feel like I need to do a disclaimer on the sermon. And rather than doing what was done in my theological context growing up, which is tell everybody that this wasn't really wine, it was just grape juice, I'm not going to tell you that. I remember it's this whole theological, well, they were new grapes. These were probably new grapes, which means they weren't fermented, all kinds of stuff. But you don't get the best wine and not have it be fermented. We can all agree on that. But also, so I would like to say this wasn't grape juice. I also like to say there's another verse in the Bible that talks about don't be drunk with wine, for this is dissipation. Basically, this is not, while the sermon has a lot to do with wine, it doesn't have a lot to do with misusing wine and other substances. So I want to go on record as that. But I also don't want to dismiss the fact that we're talking about the good stuff in this story from, that we're going to read from John today. And I had a spirited person in my life, sort of a spiritual guide and a teacher. And this person always served the best bottle of wine he had, regardless of the occasion. Always served the best bottle of wine. And a lot of people were puzzled by this practice. Because if you are a wine drinker, you go home and you're like, okay, here's the $2 chuck that I drink for, when no one's around, or when I'm having dinner with my family, and here's the $9.99 bottle when I have someone over for dinner, and here's the $15.99 bottle, the $99 bottle that I take out for company, and then I have this one bottle in the back that I'm saving for who knows what. A super special occasion that I can't even imagine. They couldn't get why this guy always served the best bottle of wine he had on hand. Wine has always had cultural significance. Perhaps this is why the story of Cana, the wedding of Cana, is alive and well today. My personal experience, and some of you will probably agree, is that the miracle of Cana is by far, the most referred to story in the Bible by church people and non-church people alike. People know the story of Cana. If they've never walked through the church door, they've heard that whole water and wine thing. Friday night I went to what's called the Art Bar in town. It's this place where you go and you paint, they have this picture, and then they step by step tell you how to paint it, and you're trying to copy them. And for the non-artists who know that you may actually be able to mess up a painting that is built to be foolproof, you get a little anxious, and it can be a little stressful, and maybe that's why they include a glass of wine, with the package. It costs $35. But people, you sit around and people immediately start joking, and, well, I don't want to dip my brush into my wine, and, I don't want to take a chug of my dirty paint water glass either, and not want to accidentally drink that. And then in such a situation, someone usually ends up saying, no problem, Brenda's a pastor. She can turn this water into wine. And everyone knows what they're talking about. I guess Jesus walking on the water, turning water into wine, they're probably top of the hit parade when it comes to Jesus stories. Making water into wine is not only the first sign that Jesus performed in his ministry, it is classic, you'll have to agree. And wine had very deep symbolic significance at this time, some 2,000 years ago. Here's a simple story, right? Jesus is at a wedding with his new recruits. They don't even really know what he's all about yet. He's dragging those 12 along right now. And so mom says, hey, your cousin's having a wedding. And Jesus is like, oh, I need a plus 12. They're coming with me. They didn't have cell phones, but if they did, they would have been using them to talk about this. And so they all come to the wedding, and the wine runs out. And some people say that's because Jesus brought 12 extra people, but I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's the point of the story. I think the wine needed to run out for this story. And Jesus' mom pointed out the wine's gone, and Jesus unsuccessfully resists his mom's implied suggestion to fix things. He tries to, but it doesn't work. And then, voila, Jesus does the best party trick of all time. It's a fairly straightforward story on the surface level. But the writer of John had a lot of symbolism in his writing and in this particular telling of the story. And there's a lot more going on than meets the eye initially. John's trying to explain something that is just too big for human language. He's trying to explain what it's like when God's intentions for humanity are finally fulfilled. He's trying to describe what God's intentions for humanity will look like when they're finally fulfilled. God is fully present, and the best of the best is flowing freely. And turning water into wine is the kind of thing that a divine figure would do in the ancient world. So John is reinforcing in this story that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. So that's one thing that doesn't meet the eye initially about this story. And furthermore, one of the images used by the prophets to describe the arrival of God's righteousness is lavish outpouring of wine. That's how the prophets describe God's arrival. Lavish outpouring of wine, and that's exactly what we get here. And so the waiters, probably the young cousins who, were too young to drink wine, or too young to drink wine, but too small just to sit at the foot of the table, they picked up the jars when Jesus told them to. They were really big jars, and I've heard 120 to 160 gallons of wine between the jars. And as a bit of a germphobe, it kind of grosses me out that these were the jars they ritually rinsed their hands and feet or whatever in, but that's what jars they were. So they fill the germy ritual washing jars and fill them with water. Presto, changeo, the water is wine. God's blessings are poured out lavishly and joyously. They are free-flowing. There is no scarcity, no limits to who's at the table. A water-to-wine banquet is what it's like when God is all around. And we have glimpses, right? We get glimpses of that. But how often does the good stuff really flow freely to anyone and to everyone? What do we do with this extravagant image of God when there's some space between what we know to be true in our spirits and our teachings and our heart and the realities that we live with? What do we do with this extravagant image of God with us? I think one of the things we can do is let our expectations be transformed by the kind of God the story is telling about and the kind of promise the story is giving us. Expect a miracle. They happen every day. One miracle that often happens right in front of us that we maybe don't see is forgiveness. Some of the forgiveness stories I've been hearing, especially lately on the news around some of the Black Lives Matter and the Martin Luther King days, like the kind of forgiveness people have offered to others for no particular reason except they believe that's the God thing to do and the Spirit opening thing to do. It's kind of a miracle. They're all around us. Expect to experience the flow of God, even when it seems like, and especially when it seems like, the thing we need to make the situation workable just isn't there. That's a faith stretcher, isn't it? Like the parents of the wedding at Cana. This thing came into a space where they have lack. That's the kind of faith that we're expected to have. And that faith and that expectation of God's flourish changes us. So at the same time, expecting to see God's flourish, we have to be courageous enough to be open to the places where that flourish of God is absent. To be unflinching when we see clear examples of where God's love has been constricted or turned off at the spigot by those who are involved. Places like Flint, Michigan, I don't know if you've been following that story, but someone at the state level decided, oh, we'll give these people over here cheaper water, and they changed the whole water delivery system and found out very quickly that the lead level in the kids was going up like 3%. Like 3 times what it should be. So this whole town of poor people is going to save the state money who's taking over governance, and instead of turning water into wine, their water's been turned into poison. When we know that God is flourish and God is life, we know that is not of God. People make mistakes. But 6 or 8 weeks later, when the state's not delivering water yet on their own dime, that's a problem. So we get to see where God is and be enlightened by where God is. We get to be honest and just kind of painfully aware of the places where God is showing us that God isn't showing up. Those are places that we need to be, that we can, as we can be. When we see this lavish image of God as water to wine, as just this flourish and open table, like our spiritual ancestors, we need to cling to, we need to respond to our prophets. Now, once a year, most churches, a lot of churches, do a Martin Luther King Jr. service, and we actually did sing some spirituals today to kind of in honor of the Sunday, but it's more than us paying attention to those great people in history. Our prophets have a role in our lives. I'm told that when Dr. King spoke to gathering of the faithful, it seemed like God was imminent. And that's a special gift of a prophet. They don't just bring words from God. The words bring a special presence that draw in the hearers of the holy and the truly communal. We need those voices around us bringing not only the words and the ideas of God, but the Spirit of God into our midst and to our hearts. Dr. King described a lavish and joy-filled dream that was palpable and visceral. If this many years later we can all remember phrases and pieces of his I Have a Dream speech. And St. Paul talks about these spiritual gifts like the prophets and the sense of charisma, the sense of bringing that good news in a way that people can really get it. And by the way, we all have a gift to bring in this way. But those prophets, those with charismatic personalities, are deeply connected to Source. They're given those gifts for the community. They're given those gifts for us. And so unless we're responding, we're kind of not using something that God has given us for our life and for our realities and to make our world a more flourishing place. So what else do we do when we see this image of God's blessing being poured out lavishly and joyously without scarcity to everyone at the table? What else do we do? We notice it. We notice where it's not. We listen for the prophets. And when we respond because the prophets are for us, the gifts of lavishness are for us. So how do we respond? We live our part. Even if people don't understand why you are serving the best bottle of wine, regardless of the occasion or regardless of who is at the table, it's not about preaching it, it's about living it. St. Francis said, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words, right? Meaning actions speak up a lot louder than words. We need to respond. We need to live our part even when it feels insignificant. Like the servants at the wedding in Cana, who all they did was dump out, hopefully, the water that people have been washing in, add new water, and bring it to Jesus. I'm sure they didn't think that was super significant, but here we are talking about them thousands of years later. Have you ever done anything that you know was good but just felt like not enough? Everybody feels like everything he does is enough. Wow. Okay, I wish we reversed the role here. I feel like things I do all the time with a good heart, they just don't seem like enough. They're just this little piece. I mean, don't you love this tent? I used to work for REI and build tents for a living. So this is really like speaking to me. That we got this tent up here. You know, so providing 30 days of housing for a whole county of Grand Junction, you know, it's more than a little bit, but it's a bit. It's like part of the puzzle. It's not the whole resolution. We live our part even with the little bit. And if, I gotta ask, have you ever heard of something called domino magnification? This is so awesome. Domino magnification. We've all dabbled a time or two with dominoes. We put them up in a row, and then your brother comes and knocks the row, and you're like, oh, and so you put them up again, and then you knock the dominoes down, and they go down in a row. You know what I'm talking about? Who knows what I'm talking about? Yeah, I thought I was living on a different planet here. Well, so there's this thing called domino magnification, and I read about this video, and the first domino that's set up in this domino magnification experiment is the size of the pinky fingernail. Imagine it. That's the first size of the domino right here. And then it's very small. That's small. That's not even a quarter of the size of a regular domino, I don't think. And then the second domino is about 1.5 times bigger than your pinky finger, you know, so I don't know, about like that. And the third domino is about 1.5 times bigger than that. You get the idea, right? Okay. So, in this line of 13 dominoes with that formula, the 13th domino, if you do that, is about 4 feet tall. And I know some of you are going to be stuck in the math now. I should have waited on this. It's going to be about 4. In this experiment, it was 4 feet tall and weighed about 100 pounds. It didn't take long for the effect to be greatly magnified when you 1.5 times this thing. So the man doing the demonstration on the video leans down to give the first pinky-sized domino a little nudge, but with a pencil, because it was too small for even his finger. The camera has to zoom in. That first domino was so small when he hits it. And it gives the tiniest domino you've ever seen a little nudge. And then 2 seconds later, the 4-foot-tall, 100-pound domino plops to the floor with a thud. And if you continue to do that pattern long enough to line up just 32 dominoes,